Wyoming Territory, June 1882, the woman collapsed just as the wind shifted and the barn door creaked open. Harrison Colt had been hauling feed sacks when he saw her, a young woman in a dust-covered traveling dress, bonnet askew, and face pale as paper crumple right there in the dirt, no more than 10 paces from where he stood. He dropped the sack and ran toward her, boots thudding against the dry earth. "Miss," he said, kneeling beside her. "Can you hear me?" Her lips moved, but no sound came. He saw the dried blood on her heel, torn shoes, and the desperate way her hands clutched a worn carpet bag. Without wasting another second, Harrison lifted her into his arms. She was far too light. He carried her inside the barn, then up the path to the house, where the air was cooler and the floor clean. He laid her gently on the settee and fetched water. She stirred as he dabbed her forehead with a damp cloth. Her eyes fluttered open, startled, soft, and the bluest he had ever seen. "You are all right," he said. "You fainted just outside. Do not try to move yet." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Where am I?" "Colt Ranch, just outside Casper. My name is Harrison. You are safe. What is your name?" She blinked at him like the question took effort. "Lettie." "Lettie Zeller. You need food and rest, Lettie." "I came from Illinois," she murmured. "By train, then the stage, then I walked. I was supposed to meet a man, a Mr. Wade. I was meant to be his bride." Harrison's chest tightened, but he did not show. She gave a small shake of her head. "I waited 3 days in town. The clerk at the post said Wade left for Oregon months ago. No one knew I was coming." Harrison stood slowly. "You walked all the way from Casper," she nodded, her face crumpling. "I did not know where else to go. I saw your barn. I thought, maybe someone here." Her voice broke. Harrison turned and poured her a second cup of water to give her time. "Drink this," he said, kneeling again. "You made it. You are safe now." She took the cup with trembling hands. Their fingers brushed. She looked up at him, and something passed between them, fragile but real. "I will not leave you out there again," he said simply. She looked like she might cry, but she only nodded, eyes wide and full of something like disbelief. Lettie slept for nearly a day. Harrison checked her fever, changed the cool cloths, and left soup on the table when she roused. He did not ask questions the next morning, only offered her a seat at the kitchen table. "I can work," she said, chewing the bread he gave her. "I do not want charity." "I do not give it," Harrison said, "but I do offer kindness." She glanced around the small but well-kept home. "Do you live here alone?" "I have since my wife died 3 winters ago." Lettie lowered her gaze. "I am sorry. Do not be. The grief is quiet now. She was not happy here. She missed the city. I think she might have left even if illness had not taken her." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Lettie said, "I was promised. I sent letters. I waited months. I thought I would have a home." "You will," Harrison said. "You are welcome to stay here as long as you need. This house has room." She swallowed hard. "I do not know what to do now. You do not have to know today." By the 5th day, Lettie had recovered most of her strength. She helped in the kitchen, folded laundry, and brushed the horses with calm hands. Harrison watched her from the porch sometimes, her figure small against the open land, but steady. One evening, rain rolled in. Harrison lit the lamps and they sat near the fireplace. Lettie mended a shirt of his, her stitches neat and patient. "Why did you come all this way?" he asked quietly. She paused, then said, "My father passed last year, my mother before that. I was alone. No one wanted a woman who reads too much and talks too little. I thought maybe a man out here would see me differently." Harrison looked at her hands, the way they moved carefully over the fabric. "I see you," he said. She looked up quickly, startled. "I mean that," he added. "You have grit, Lettie. You walked for miles because you believed something good might still be out there. That matters." Her eyes softened. "No one's ever said anything like that to me." He cleared his throat. "Well, they should have." 2 weeks passed, then 3. Lettie stayed. She began baking bread in the mornings, humming under her breath. Harrison showed her how to ride his gentlest mare. They worked side by side, fencing and stacking hay, and during the long evenings they talked. Not about the past, but about books and music and what made them laugh. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the low hills, Harrison found Lettie staring out over the corral, arms folded around herself. "You look like you are thinking hard," he said. She turned toward him. "Just wondering if this is real." He stepped closer, voice low. It feels real to me. She looked up at him, and something in her expression shifted. I never wanted to fall in love again. I told myself I was done hoping. I did not expect to feel this either, he said. But I do. Lettie took a deep breath. Do you think there could be a future here? Harrison reached for her hand. If you want it, yes, I do. She let him hold her hand and then leaned into him, resting her head against his chest. It was quiet, only the wind and the horses rustling in the distance. But it was the first time in years that Lettie felt safe, and the first time in years Harrison felt like the house was full again. They stood there as the sun set behind them, two people who had lost nearly everything but found something greater than they ever expected, something worth holding on to. The creek behind the house had slowed to a trickle by mid-July, its banks edged in dry grass and scrub. Lettie stood at the edge of it now, skirts lifted just enough to keep from dragging through burrs, a pail swinging from her hand. The air was sharp with sage and sun-warmed stone, and a hawk turned slow above the hills. Harrison watched from a distance, one arm resting on the post of the porch, a rasp still in his other hand from sharpening tools. She didn't know he was there. Her gaze was fixed downstream, where the water bent around a cluster of cottonwoods. Her expression was unreadable, but her stillness pulled at something in him. He made his way down the slope, quiet on the packed earth. When she finally heard his steps, she turned without flinching. There's a patch of wild mint growing just past the bend, she said. I thought I might bring some back for the kitchen. I'll walk with you, he said. They moved together without speaking for a while, the dry grass brushing their boots. Birds startled from the brush ahead, and Lettie's mouth curved faintly, not quite a smile, but something lighter than she'd worn in days. I used to gather herbs with my mother, she said at last, mostly for teas, sometimes for poultices. She taught me to dry them by hanging them upside down in the cellar. He glanced at her. You still remember what each is good for? She nodded, bending to brush her fingers over a sprig of mint. This one's good for the stomach and for nerves. He crouched beside her, studying the leaves. I wouldn't mind a cup of that now and then. She glanced at him sidelong. You get nervous? More than you'd think, he said. She didn't laugh, but her eyes lifted to meet his, and the silence that followed felt closer than words. By the time they returned to the house, the sun had begun to sink, casting long shadows across the yard. Harrison offered to take the pail, but she shook her head. I've got it, she said. Besides, I like the wait. He held the door open for her, and she stepped inside, the scent of mint trailing behind her. That night, the kettle hissed softly on the stove. Lettie reached for a tin mug, filling it with the steeped water, then passed it to Harrison. He took a sip, and his brow lifted in mild surprise. You weren't lying. That's good. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed loosely. There's something honest about making things with your own hands. He set the mug down. You've made more than tea since you came here. Her gaze dropped to the floorboards, then lifted again. I didn't expect to feel useful again, not like this. You are, in every way. The words hung between them, and she didn't look away this time. Instead, she stepped forward, slow and deliberate, until only a few inches separated them. I've been thinking about staying, she said. Not just through the summer, for good. He didn't move, didn't reach out, though he wanted to. What would that mean for you? She met his eyes. It would mean choosing this life, this land, you, he breathed in, steady. Then I reckon I'd ask if you'd want to build something with me, not just share the work, but the rest of it too, all the quiet years ahead. Her fingers brushed his then, light as a thread drawn through cloth. That's what I want. He closed his hand around hers, firm and certain. Outside, the wind shifted, rustling the cottonwoods by the creek, and the house felt warmer than it had in years. Later, as the sky deepened and the lamps burned low, they sat on the porch side by side, legs brushing, her head resting against his shoulder. The stars blinked into view above them, and the night stretched wide and still. Neither of them spoke, but the silence between them was full. By the first week of August, the mornings came cooler, with mist clinging low along the edges of the pasture. Lettie stood in the doorway with her sleeves rolled, hands dusted in flour, watching the light spread over the ridgeline. The land had begun its slow shift toward autumn, though the days still held heat enough to crack the earth. Harrison appeared from the barn, wiping his palms on a rag as he approached. His shirt was damp at the collar, and a smear of oil darkened one cuff. "You've got something on your cheek," Lettie said, nodding toward his face. He reached up, missing the mark entirely. "Other side," she added, stepping forward. She brushed the smudge away with her thumb, then let her hand fall. "There." He tilted his head a little. "I'm heading into town after breakfast. Need to check on that order of fencing wire from the freight office." She studied his face a moment longer before nodding. "Do you mind if I come along?" "Course not. Just need to hitch the wagon." She returned to the kitchen, tying her hair back with a strip of muslin. She hadn't left the ranch since arriving, not farther than the creek anyway. The thought of town stirred something uncertain in her chest, but she packed a biscuit in a cloth napkin and set her shoulders straight. They rode out just after sunup, the wagon wheels creaking in rhythm with the sway of the harness. Harrison handled the reins with easy familiarity, his eyes on the road ahead, but Lettie could feel him watching her from time to time, checking her quiet without asking. The town of Casper was waking slow when they arrived, the boardwalk still damp from a morning sweep, and the telegraph office shuddered against the sun. A boy chased a dog down the main street, and a woman with a basket of pears called out a greeting from her storefront. Harrison tied the horses at the general store and turned to her. "I'll be at the depot. Take your time." She nodded, stepping inside. The shop smelled of tobacco and molasses, and the shelves were lined with bolts of rough cloth, tins, and jars of penny candy. A man at the counter gave her a polite nod but didn't ask questions. She moved slowly along the rows, fingers trailing over spools of thread and a small stack of hymnals. One had a cloth cover, worn at the edges, and she opened it to find penciled names on the inside cover. Someone's family had once sung from it. She bought it with a few coins Harrison had pressed into her hand before they left. "For whatever you'd like," he'd said, and she hadn't known what that might be until now. When she stepped back outside, the air had grown sharper, the wind lifting the hem of her skirt. She spotted Harrison across the street, talking with a tanner whose face was half hidden under a wide-brimmed hat. The man seemed to be gesturing toward a stack of crates, but Harrison's eyes flicked toward her as she crossed. "Find anything?" he asked. She held up the hymnal. "It reminded me of home." He looked at the book, then at her. "You'll have to teach me a few of those." They walked back to the wagon, neither speaking until they were on the trail again, the horses plodding steady. "Did you ever go to services back in Illinois?" Harrison asked. "My father led them after our town lost its preacher." He wasn't a man who spoke much, but when he stood behind the pulpit, people listened. "After he passed, I couldn't go back, not right away." He nodded, saying nothing. "I think I could again," she said after a time. "If there was someone to sit beside me." He glanced over. "I'd sit beside you." The wagon rolled on, the fields opening wide around them, and her hand settled lightly over the hymnal on her lap. That evening, back at the house, Lettie stood barefoot in the parlor, thumbing through the pages. Harrison had gone to see to the horses, and the air inside was still. When he returned, he paused in the doorway, watching her. She turned to face him, her voice even. "I'd like to stay, Harrison, not just in the house, but with you." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he crossed the room, took her hand, and traced his thumb gently over her knuckles. "Then I'd like to build something that lasts," he said. "With you beside me." She leaned into the space between them, closing it not with urgency but with quiet certainty. When he kissed her, it was tender and without haste, as if they were sealing something already begun. Outside, the wind stirred the grass in long, slow waves. Inside, the house held a new stillness, a rooted kind, not hollow but whole. And for the first time, Lettie felt not like a guest in someone else's life, but a woman who had found her place. The first frost came quietly, silvering the fence rails before dawn. Lettie stepped out early, shawl drawn close, her breath fogging the air as she crossed the yard toward the henhouse. The hens clucked low, unsettled by the cold, and she moved among them with practiced care. Her hands were pink from the chill when she returned inside, but her eyes were bright. Harrison was at the stove, frying cornmeal mush in a cast iron pan. He glanced over as she entered. "You beat me to it," he said, sliding the pan off the heat. "I was going to check on the hens." "You do enough," she said, unpinning her hair as she stepped to the basin. "Besides, they know me now." He set 2 plates on the table. "That's so. They complain less when I take their eggs." He poured coffee into 2 tin cups, one for her, then leaned on the table as she sat. "Winter's coming faster than I expected," she nodded. "I'll start making preserves." "The cellar's cool enough now. You'll show me how, if you don't mind getting syrup on your sleeves." He grinned, but it faded into something quieter as he sat across from her. "There's something I've been meaning to ask." She looked up, one hand resting on the rim of her cup. He reached into his vest pocket and placed a small velvet pouch on the table. "I had this made in town, took some of my mother's old silver and the smith shaped it for me." She opened the pouch slowly. Inside was a ring, simple, narrow, the band hammered smooth, with a single garnet set at the center. "I know I didn't send for a bride," he said, "and you didn't come here expecting me, but I've come to want a life with you that's more than shared work and quiet evenings." "I want to marry you, Lettie." She ran her thumb along the inside of the band. "It's warm," she said softly, "even though it's cold in here. It's yours if you'll have it, and me." She closed her fingers around the ring. "Yes." He stood then, and she rose to meet him. He took her hands in his, and for a long moment they simply breathed together in the hush of the morning kitchen. Later that day, Harrison rode to the neighboring ranch to ask the Sloan family to witness the vows, and to borrow their preacher, who held Sunday meetings in their parlor every fortnight. Lettie stayed behind, setting aside flour and lard to make a pie, her fingers steady as she measured. The wedding took place the following afternoon in the clearing behind the house, with the cottonwoods bare and the sun low in the sky. Lettie wore a pale blue dress she'd sewn herself from a bolt she'd found in the back of the pantry. Harrison wore his best shirt, the collar pressed flat, and he'd trimmed his beard close that morning without nicking his jaw. Mrs. Sloan brought apple cider, and her daughter played a hymn on a fiddle that had seen better days. Lettie's hand in Harrison's was firm and sure when they spoke their vows, and when the preacher nodded, she slid the ring onto his finger. He'd had one made for himself, too, forged from a strip of iron and polished until it shone. There was no dancing, but the Sloans stayed for pie and coffee, and the children played tag among the fence posts until the light faded. By the time the guests rode off, the stars had come out in a clear stretch of sky. Inside, Harrison lit the fire while Lettie folded the extra quilts at the foot of the bed. He turned to find her watching him, the lamplight soft on her cheek. "I used to think I could only belong to someone through duty," she said, "but this feels like something I chose." "Not something I was given." He crossed to her, brushing his knuckles along her jaw. "You chose me, and I'll carry that with me the rest of my life." She leaned forward, resting her forehead to his. "And I'll carry you." Outside, the cold deepened. But in the house, warmth lingered slow, steady, and earned. The snow held off longer than expected, but by late November, the first flurries began to drift low across the pasture. Lettie stood at the window, her breath warming the glass, watching the flakes settle on the clothesline Harrison had taken down 2 days earlier. The air held that muted weight that came before a full storm, still, but thick with promise. Behind her, Harrison was oiling the hinges on the front door. The wood had begun to swell with the cold, and the latch stuck if not handled just right. "You think we'll be snowed in this week?" Lettie asked without turning. "Likely," he said. "Sloan said the pass might close if the wind picks up." "He's already moved his cattle to the lower field." She stepped away from the window, wrapping her shawl tighter. "Then we'd best set aside extra kindling." "I already stacked more behind the stove," he said, glancing up, "and I salted the meat last night." "We're ahead of it." They had fallen into a rhythm neither had expected, but both had come to trust, quiet, steady, and shaped by the land. The kind of life that didn't ask for more than full attention and patience. Harrison stood, wiping his hands on a rag. "There's something I've been meaning to show you." She raised her brows, curious, but followed him without question as he led her to the back of the house. Beyond the kitchen, where the porch narrowed and the wind cut sharper, he opened the smaller door that led into the old storage shed. Inside, the dust had been swept clean. The shelves had been cleared and a small table stood in the center, beside a narrow window that caught the morning light. "I thought you might want a place of your own," he said. "For reading, sewing, whatever you like." "I can bring in a stove if it stays cold." She stepped in slowly, fingers brushing the edge of the table. "You made this, had extra boards left from the fence," he said. "Figured they'd suit a desk better than another stack of kindling." Her throat tightened and she turned toward him, quiet for a moment. It feels like a room made for someone who belongs here." He looked at her then, not with question but certainty. "You do," she crossed to him, laying a hand over his chest, just above his heart. "And you've built more than a home for me, Harrison. You've built a life I didn't know I was allowed to want." He kissed her, slow and sure, with the kind of warmth that settled bone deep. The storm winds grew stronger outside, but the little room held its own calm. That night, snow thickened against the windows. Lettie lit 2 lanterns, setting one in their bedroom and the other in her new room, where she'd already placed her hymnal and a folded scrap of calico for piecing. Harrison brought in the last of the dried apples from the barn loft, and they sat by the fire, peeling and slicing together. "You ever think about what comes next?" he asked, his voice low. She looked over, knife paused mid-cut. "You mean after winter? I mean, the rest, the years." "Maybe even children," she blinked, not startled but thoughtful. "I'd like that, not because it's expected, but because I could love raising someone with you." He nodded, reaching over to slide a curl behind her ear. "Wouldn't need much, just a cradle and some time. And a roof that doesn't leak," she added, smiling. "We've got that, at least." They laughed, and the sound of it filled the house in a way it hadn't before. Spring came late, but it came all the same. The snow melted slow, revealing green in small patches between the barn rails, along the creek's edge, and in the narrow garden rows Lettie had marked with stones. They planted together, knee-deep in soil, hands dirtied and calloused, but never apart. Lettie read aloud most evenings, her voice steady as she sat near the door of her little room. Now lined with shelves Harrison had carved, by the first summer, the land had softened with bloom, and Harrison built a cradle from pine he felled himself. Lettie stitched a quilt small enough to cover it, each square cut from the dress she'd worn on their wedding day. They didn't speak often of the past, not because it was forgotten, but because it no longer held them. Their days were shaped by what they chose each morning, feeding the hens, mending the fence, walking the ridge just to watch the light change. The kind of living that asked only for presents and gave love in return. And when the nights grew long again and the wind turned cold once more, they remained in that house, side by side. 2 people who had once been strangers, now bound by the quiet, patient work of making something whole. They never left the land, they never needed to.